Hello and welcome to House of Rugby Ireland here on JOE. We've got a great show lined up for you all today. It is a massive weekend of Champions Cup Rugby and myself and Fergus are going to chat about those Munster and Leinster games. Later on, Fergus will be joined by Madigan and Chris Henry for a great discussion on some of their best European Cup memories, underrated teammates and Rhys Ruddock running around in his underwear in the Shelbourne Hotel. And there's a super interview I had with my Ireland teammates, Dorothy and Beibhinn Parsons, that you really enjoy. Okay, let's get to it.
House of Rugby Ireland, here on JOE. Game changed.
Well, unfortunately, there was no Leinster game on Friday. That one was cancelled due to a positive COVID test in their squad, and Leinster are now in the quarterfinals. We'll talk about that in a few minutes, but first we have to start with that heartbreaker from Munster. It feels like deja vu here. We're recording this episode on Saturday night and we're not long off Munster's 40-33 loss to Toulouse that has ended their European dreams for another year. Fergus, what did you make of the game?
Yeah, I thought it was a great game. Jeez, it was a brilliant game of rugby. A lot of tries, lovely day down in Thomond Park, and I thought both sides played some great stuff at times. Obviously, you have Toulouse playing that free-flowing style, but I thought Munster's performance really picked up from that final against Leinster, in fairness to them. But they probably just lost their way, from in the last 20 minutes a little bit. They lost they lost their hold on the game, and Toulouse just pulled away, and bitterly disappointing, I'd say, for those guys. But Toulouse were well worth the win, I think, in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. It really was a tale of two halves, and Munster took everything Toulouse could throw at them in the first half and still led 16-9 at the break. Was this the best you have seen Damien Dialende play for Munster?
Yeah, probably. And it doesn't really get much bigger than that. Knockout stages of the Champions Cup, and he really stood up. I thought particularly after last week he was relatively quiet against Leinster. I thought Robbie Henshaw and Rory O'Loughlin probably outplayed the Munster centres last week, but he was outstanding for Munster. Yeah, he really was brilliant. He gave them go forward ball, all day. He made a couple of great breaks, particularly for the Keith Earls' second try, I think it was, where he made that initial break through the middle. He had some big moments in the game, but unfortunately it wasn't really enough to pull Munster over the line in the end.
No, it wasn't. And Toulouse came out in the second half and they were a completely different team and they managed to get on the score sheet really early. Munster have to be gutted about their defence of that try. It was so early in the second half. It's the last thing you want to do, or what you want to start the second half with. How, I suppose, you have to look at the Munster defence and question it there.
Yeah, and I think, listen, that Toulouse team is going to have its purple patches against any defence, really. Part of the way they play, it's kind of somewhat undefendable, really. And they managed to pull those plays together in the second half more so. I thought, Munster really managed them, the opportunities that they gave them in the first half very well. And then the second half probably slipped off a bit. And then the problem is with Toulouse, when they get their tails up, the confidence just, starts to flow through the team, and those, passes out the back and those offloads just start sticking. And once they get in behind you, they're very, very difficult to stop. And that was kind of the way the game unfolded. I did think that the Toulouse bench probably added more than the Munster bench as well. The likes of Joe Takori came on and made a massive impact, along with a few of the other forwards there, particularly in the scrum. So, great game of rugby though. But Munster fans and the Munster players will be bitterly disappointed. Yeah,
they absolutely will, and two players as well that will be disappointed not to have been there. Well, I suppose Peter Mahoney won, with his injury not playing, but obviously Tadhg Beirne was on the field but went off with an injury and looked like he was really badly in pain. Like, two guys like that, they're the type of guys you need in the second half that are going to pull it out when you really need it, and that must have had an impact on the team as well.
Yeah, for sure, because I think, in fairness, Tadhg was having more of an impact on that game than he had last week. I thought the way he played through the Six Nations, the amount of turnovers he got on the ground, Leinster's ruck was particularly good last week. I'm not even sure how many, if he even got one. He could have got one last week, but he got a 2 or 3 against Toulouse, particularly when they were putting high balls up on Intimac, and he managed those very well, took them in the air. But Tig was getting over the ball very quickly and turning over the ball there. One of them, I'm pretty sure, led to Keith Earls' first try, which was brilliant piece of play from Munster in general. But the back row though for Munster, I thought stood up. Gavin Coombs had an outstanding game. He managed to get over for that try, which he showed incredible strength for that. But they definitely would have missed Peter O'Mahony's leadership for sure, because if he's playing there from the start, they would have had maybe stronger guys coming in that last 20 minutes that could have been moved in off the bench. So he would have been missed today.
Yeah, I think Jack O'Donoghue was phenomenal, but I suppose traditionally had Peter Mahoney been there, he probably wouldn't have been starting, and then you would have had that impact off the bench like they seem to have. It was just the difference between the two teams. And we spoke about it last week, actually, that the halfbacks pairings, there isn't a better halfback pairing than Dupont and Entomac, and today they absolutely showed that, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. They did. I think they were brilliant. They seemed to just get the balance right of the older kind of French generation of trying things and pulling it off, but also managing a game as well. I think they have a lovely balance there where it's not completely headless what they do, because I actually think Dupont he probably manages the game for Toulouse and France. The way he plays, he just marshals everyone around him, and then he has that X factor to make breaks. And you saw that line he ran for the kind of try that won them the game, where they made the break up the left hand side. Brilliant feat by the winger Lapel, and lovely ball back into Dupont, and he always runs that trail line. He gets one of them a game these days, and it's just it kind of sums up his work rate, and he kind of sees those things a little bit quicker than everyone else.
Yeah, they unfortunately do. I suppose in terms of positivity, it definitely was a better Munster performance based on last week. Munster didn't really show up to that Pro 14 final. At least there was some positives, some really good performances. Like you said, Gavin Coombs, Dialende was looking very sharp. Carberry looked, the more games he gets under his belt, the better. And obviously Keith Earls, he's showing week in, week out that he still has it. I suppose going into the Rainbow Cup, I suppose everyone has forgotten about the Rainbow Cup. I think everyone, even CJ at the end of the game there, people forgot that it mightn't actually be his last game for Munster. We still have Rainbow Cup to play. And moving into the Rainbow Cup, what can Munster fans cling onto? What positives can they cling to?
It's very hard to draw positives right now for them, really. They've just got knocked out of the Champions Cup, and they just got beaten in the Pro 14 final. So a really tough few weeks for the squad. I do think that, COVID has shown in these knockout games, it can take the home advantage is massively taken out of the equation. I think that would have cost Munster for sure. I think that's the first time they got beaten in Europe there in 5 years. And you can be sure that the game probably would have at least been tighter if they had that home crowd. It's such a huge advantage for them. So I think they missed that today. But in terms of positives, I think that from this season, no silverware again, unfortunately for them, but they have some really, really talented young guys coming through. Gavin Coombs has been brilliant. He was, for such a young guy, he was playing against one of the biggest packs around today, and he showed his worth and his quality. And then you've got Craig Casey getting a bit more exposure. In fairness, Connor had a very good game, and he couldn't do a whole lot when he came on, but nice bit of exposure for him again. But there's other guys as well that have gotten snippets of game time this year. You've got that young second rower Hearn who was playing Irish 20s, and he's got a couple of games for Munster. So they do have some bright sparks coming through in the academy, and hopefully that'll make them stronger next year.
Yeah, it's been a really difficult few weeks for Munster and Munster Rugby players and Munster Rugby supporters. But you're Johan van Graan going in on Monday morning to training. What is it going to look like? Is there going to be a review? Is there going to be a preview? Is there going to be a pep talk to G the boys up? So in your experience, what needs and what has been done for the team? Because they do still have a busy few weeks ahead of them.
Yeah, they do. It's a tough thing to manage for coaches, and I suppose that the longer I went on in my career, the more I realized that sometimes it's actually um, you know judging the mood in the camp as well. I'm sure these guys are going to be really devastated for the next few days. So Monday might be a little bit early to go straight into the review and start telling them what went wrong and that. Because as you say, they do have more rugby to play in the Rainbow Cup, but the reality is they're going to have to go over the stuff that didn't go well and the improvements that they need to make. So um, it'll be some tough viewing because the guys will be thinking enough about it. When you lose a knockout game in the European Cup, it's the guts of a week really until you can move on. So those guys will be hurting massively, but I'm sure Johan van Gram and the rest of the team, Stephen Larkham and that will, try pitch it in a certain way, maybe, from Tuesday onwards just to move on, take the learnings and just try use the Rainbow Cup as a springboard.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll move on to Leinster's game. Bizarre situation, but I suppose it just sums up the current climate and the world that we live in at the moment. Leinster beat Toulon via a very bizarre decision. Leinster advanced to the quarterfinals after the EPCR awarded their last 16 game to them. Toulon had a positive COVID case on Wednesday, but that player did not travel to Ireland. However, as they were playing in Ireland, several of his teammates were deemed close contacts. All Toulon players were in Dublin and they tested negative, but as Toulon refused to replace 6 players that were identified as close contacts, the game was awarded to Leinster. Toulon say it is deplorable and it is a scandal. It's bizarre, really, to be honest, Fergus, isn't it? Do you have any sympathy for them?
Oh, of course, you have to have sympathy for them. Purely my Leinster hat on. Obviously it's great for them to get a bye in a European Cup knockout game. But when have you ever heard of that happening before? I think it sums up, as you say, the COVID world we're living in at the moment. It's fairly ruthless, for the not to be able to be given the chance. Toulon have worked hard enough to get themselves to this point. Sure, the staff and organisation and players will be absolutely gutted that they've kind of been taken out by this. But on the flip side, Leinster, leaves them in a strong position. They didn't play a game against a very tough side, which would have been a tough game to win. Number one, but number two, they're not going to have those bashed bodies. They're going to have guys nice and fresh, and even a longer lead-in period now to what looks like Exeter away, which is going to be a huge challenge.
Yeah, looking back, I suppose, to the COVID regulations, and like you've been involved in it, I'm currently involved in it still. And, if you're a close contact of somebody, well, one, you shouldn't be leaving your room. Two, you shouldn't be, you should be self-isolating regardless of a negative COVID test. Like, it's, I suppose we're so used to the structures in place, but it's so difficult to even comprehend how they would have got on a plane and how they thought they would have got away with it, or how they never did the close contact tracing.
Yeah. Well, I found out the hard way over in the Barbarians, that's for sure. But I was in environments where, in Leinster, where those COVID protocols were in play, and it's a tough one. It's a tough pill to swallow for that Toulon team. I mean, it's hard to get your head around the fact that they don't get the opportunity, but the schedule is so tight now with the competition. That the quarterfinals are just next week, and they can't move that because everything has been put back for so long, and the games are coming thick and fast now. So yeah, it sounds like there's a fair bit to the story there. I'm sure more and more will come out over the next few days. Toulon don't sound like they're going to let this lie. So, but at the end of the day, the decision has been made. So, from Leinster's perspective, it's just about preparing for this huge game now against the Exeter Chiefs.
Yeah, absolutely. And Exeter have just won that game 47-25 over Leon, so they definitely will have a tough task ahead of them. I suppose I just think it's a bizarre situation because earlier on in the season, Toulon, that exact same team, they refused to play Scarlets because the Welsh side had a one positive COVID case in their camp, and here they are with one COVID case and 6 close contacts, and then think they can get away with it. And then I think the match was suggested, or it was requested to play on Sunday, but their whole front row was out. Their 6 front rows are all close contacts, so they suppose it's not feasible for them to play that game. But it must have been heartbreaking for the Leinster boys. Like, it was so late, your captain's run done, your team's named, you're prepped, you know, the RDS is looking amazing. It was a perfect night for rugby. Have you been talking to any of the boys, or, you know, how late did they actually find out about it?
Yeah, I think it sounded like it was pretty last minute. You know, I don't think they're going to be the ones good at being honest. And like, listen, it was a nice opportunities for a couple of guys to put their hands up and play another game at home. But you know, getting a bye in a European knockout game, they're not going to complain too much about that. That's, you know, that's a huge doggy life for Leinster to have gotten, and that could really work in their advantage now, leading into, as I said, this really, you know, finally balanced kind of a schedule leading into the end of this competition. So it just means that, you know, they don't have that 80 minutes where guys could get injured. You know, they could have lost the game. Toulon are extremely good. They would have been preparing for that for quite a while. Star-studded team. So yeah, from Leinster's perspective, I can imagine that they sound like they're fairly happy now with how things have worked out, and obviously it's just disappointing for Toulon.
Yeah, and that leaves Leinster as the only Irish team left in the Champions Cup. Finally, before we get to your chat with Ian and Chris and my interview with Beibhinn and Dorothy, some Ulster fans have been upset that we haven't mentioned Ian Henderson on all our Lions talk for the last couple of weeks. Fergus, would you have Ian Henderson in your line squad?
Yeah, well, I probably would, yeah. But I mean, we were talking about line starters, so I'm not so sure he'll start. To be honest, he could, you know, depending on injuries, depending on the kind of form he puts in the Challenge Cup. Like, you'd imagine Ulster will get to the latter stages of the Challenge Cup. There's, you know, one of the best teams left in that competition. You know, and Ian Henderson's been playing some of his best rugby in years, but it's just such a competitive position. You know, Eimear, you know, we all were kind of agreeing and disagreeing on the different combinations and different guys that could be in there. But yeah, Ulster fans, they shouldn't feel like we're being too biased or anything like that. We know all about Ian. It's just, you know, from my perspective, I'm not so sure he'll start, but I'd love if the guy travel, because he's played some great rugby this year.
Yeah, and I'm sure Gatlin will answer that question very, very soon. Very good. Now, let's get to those interviews. I hope you enjoy.
House of Rugby Ireland, here on Joe. Game changed.
Yeah, and it's exciting. Listen, this time of year, every year is great, you know, because as fans as well, they come off watching like a Six Nations campaign. You can look forward to the European knockout stages, and you know, leading into that, I suppose the three of us are lucky enough to have some great memories in the competition. And what ones would stick out for you? Like, I remember when you guys went down to Munster as well in 2012. What was the feeling in the camp leading into that week, and where was your heads at in that?
Yeah, like that. When people ask me from my career, what was your, you know, one of your favourite Ulster games that you played in, that 2012 game in Thomond Park was probably the highlight for me with Europe. I think as a player group we were confident that we had a good team, but obviously going to Thomond Park, you know, one of the toughest places in world rugby to go to, especially then with the team that they had. So yeah, I mean, look, we travelled down there with confidence, but you know, we knew we had to come out the block really, really fast and start strong, and the game just came our way. You know, Craig Gilroy, I remember scoring a fantastic individual try, but I think we physically turned up and dominated them. You know, my biggest memories is you know, Big Fergus, I think, had his, you know, one of his best games in an Ulster jersey. He just absolutely dominated the breakdown, and when someone like that is leading from the front, everyone just, you know, lifted as well, and we had a good team then. You know, and when I look back at my Ulster career, we obviously unfortunately didn't win any trophies, but you know, there was times where there was a serious strong spine of a team. You know, we had John Afoa at that stage, and yeah, just a good mixture of homegrown Ulster players coming into a good
young
age
and old
group
as well. You had obviously Paddy breaking through, and then older guys as well there.
Yeah, there was a real good balance, you know, and also, sorry, the biggest thing was the Ulster fans that came down, and you know, the Ulster fans had their best performance of the year. The noise of the stadium was just electric, and once you have a good moment, and then it leads to another good moment, and the fans get behind you, and that's what European rugby is. There's so much emotion around European Cup rugby, and that's where I felt that it was the first time where we really lived up to that expectation, I guess, of European rugby. Whenever we weren't, but previous to that, we'd won the league a few years before, but we never were a dominating force. So that was, for us, it was a big moment, and certainly something that I'll always remember. And that, the final whistle, whenever, Agara, I remember, being able to play against someone like Agara, and you see him with his hands on his head, couldn't believe they lost at home in such a big moment, and us, the excitement, the exuberation, and Johan Muller, and I remember there's a picture of Cavey giving it stacks as well, and it was just a great moment. And obviously, we'd like to have had a few more of those moments and winning some silverware, but for a one-off game to win down in Munster like that, it was great memories, and very lucky to be part of that team.
Yeah, for me, obviously I've been at Ulster now for, I think it's 8 or 9 months, and Ulster have had some huge days in the European Cup, beating some the French giants, especially at home in the Kingspan, and that game against Munster, as you touched on, and even 2 years ago against Leinster in the Aviva, and one thing that has struck me, you won't hear Ulster shouting from the rooftops, but I do feel that there is an internal confidence there that they can beat anyone on their day.
Yeah, and this has been something that's been talked about for for the last 10 years. When I was there, it's about being consistent, and it's not just being able to win those one-off games. And without a doubt, I mean, from an Ulster perspective, whenever you saw the draws and you had a big French giants coming to Belfast, or a big English Premiership teams, there is like European Cup game week. It's just different. If you could bottle that feeling up and use it every week, whether it's the Dragons or whether it's Clermont, you'd love, if the best teams, it doesn't matter who you play, you perform. But certainly there were stages that whenever I was with Ulster, our game's improved so much in those big moments, and that's the beautiful, that's the special, the extra edge that European rugby brings up. And it starts from the start of the week, the training week. There's different rugby balls that are brought out, the European Cup balls. There's more media attention. Everyone's maybe a wee bit more of an edge because there's so much at stake.
More of a buzz from
you want to play
nerves
those
about who's going to get picked and all that sort of stuff. There's more disappointment. And then even managing the players that are very close and are maybe playing most of the league games, playing outstanding, for whatever reason, they fall the wrong side of selection. And for them, for coaches and also other players to kind of rally around and make sure that they're on the right, the same page, because we all know that if those guys who are in the bibs for those weeks, if they're not training very well, you're not going to prepare in the same way. But going back to that, what you guys had mentioned about the internal confidence, and obviously you could see that from Ulster, particularly the last few years, and you were in a great team there for many years, Chris, and just unlucky that it was at a time where you couldn't win a trophy. But I remember after that you beat Munster down there, and the messaging for us on leading into, because I think it was a few weeks until the final, and you did a lap of honour, and we just go in our heads, we were going, these guys are just happy to be in the final, and that was the flag for us straight away. We're like, these guys are just happy to be there. And I don't know, obviously you said there was an Ulster crowd down there, but it's amazing what these small things can do for an added motivation for another team. And sometimes managing that, you need to be quite careful,
Yeah, and I think actually Rory Best, I wonder after that moment in Thomond when we did that lap of honour, it was such a big day for us, but in hindsight 100%, moving forward after that, whenever we had big wins, you always were careful not to in the group stages and in the quarterfinals, semifinals. Rory, I remember saying, right, let's just calm it down, because the end game was winning the trophy. It wasn't about just winning a quarterfinal. And I remember Rory, after a lot of games, going, right, let's just calm it down. This is not the final. And yeah, it's amazing that you guys actually remember that, because I actually don't remember doing a lap of honour. I remember celebrating a lot because we had a few weeks gap in between the quarterfinal in Munster to the semi-finals, which was Edinburgh. And yeah, we obviously we went back and we had a great bus trip back, and I remember going to, so the morning after that quarterfinal, I had to go to get physio. So it must have been mid-morning or lunchtime, and I was driving from my house to the physio room or to the training venue, and where my house is, there's a big roundabout on the way to the training venue. There's 4 big statues up there, so you have to drive past it to go around. And whenever I drove around, I could see an Ulster jersey on one of the statues. So I kind of caught myself going, gosh, the Ulster fans must have just put up. But then I drove around and you could see it was number 12. So it was Paddy Wallace's jersey. So I'm not saying that Paddy Wallace was somehow on this roundabout in the early hours of the morning. I'm pretty sure it wasn't Paddy. I think he swapped the jersey with somebody else, maybe one of the younger players. But like everyone that day, then fans were, Ulster fans who were driving would have beat their horns because the jersey was on the statue. So yeah, like that's just the difference. That shows the difference of where Leinster were that year in 2012 compared to where we were. As you said, it was a brilliant win for us. But I look back in that final in 2012 in Twickenham, which was one of 80,000 people watching. It was a big moment, of course, in my career. But I don't have regrets because we weren't the better team. Leinster were by far the best team. I don't think anyone else in Europe were going to beat you on that day. And yeah, like it just shows where Leinster, that was in 2012, and look where Leinster still are now. And yeah, it was fantastic memories and day, but certainly hindsight, I've no regrets on Leinster winning and us not winning in 2012.
Yeah, what's tough there for Ulster, and I think I've experienced something similar in the short time I've been at the club, was that in 2012, if you looked at the 2 squads there, you would have thought, age profile wise, you would have thought Ulster are going to be the team. Maybe that could be the force in Irish rugby over the next 5 years. Leinster definitely had a more aging squad. You look at the likes of Owen Redden, Isaac Boss, Nasiwa, Gordon Darcy, Brian O'Driscoll, Leo Cullen. There was guys on the other side of their Shane Jennings, guys on the other side of their career. You look at the Ulster squad. There was a very young backline coming through. The likes of Hendy in the pack, yourself, that would have been coming into your prime.
Craig Gilroy.
Yeah, Gilly was playing, fantastic stuff.
Katie.
But, for me, this year with Ulster, like we got into the final against Leinster. It was a different squad. And, not that we weren't expecting to win it or we didn't think we could win it, but I think playing in that final, off the back of it, we now realise, we're actually good enough. We competed for a period of time in that final. We've played Leinster a couple of times since. We know that we can go toe-to-toe with them, and the belief is there for me in the current group. Like, what do you think it was that you didn't kick on from that European final and get a trophy?
There was a couple of semi-finals where we played Leinster down in Leinster because... So the final was played in Leinster the league, because Kingspan was being refurbished. So I think that was a big moment. I do believe that if that was played in a neutral venue, or especially Kingspan, I think that could have been a different day.
That was the year you went like 14 in a row.
We won. I think we won the league, but we obviously had to play in the playoffs. And then the other year, Ulster played Glasgow away in a semi-final, and we were winning the game the whole way through. And I think it was Ricky Lutton pulled Glasgow scrum half right at the end, and then the penalty was reversed and they went up the other end, scored last play of the game. So two moments that I go, yes, there was trophies that could have gone missing in Ulster, and it's now I've hung up the boots. I don't think about it hardly at all until I'm talking with old rugby friends, but it is those. I regret those moments way more than what I do in that 2012 final, because as you named off all those Leinster players, and yes, we had our John Afoa, Tom Courts, and real good spine to our team, but we not the same calibre, I guess, of what that Leinster side. And I think Ulster, from someone who's been out away from Ulster for 2 years now, I think of being in the Challenge Cup could be the best thing for that group.
I think it could be a great stepping stone, to win that. It's not an easy competition to win.
Absolutely not.
There's an awful lot of good teams that are still in that, and it's often that success there can breed success going forward. In the actual Champions Cup, and whether it's domestically as well, it can be a really good springboard. So I think it is a great opportunity for you.
And you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't think Ulster have ever played
in
the Challenge Cup. You know, the only province I think that haven't had to go to the Challenge Cup, just the way it's worked out. So it's a fresh tournament. It's completely new. Yes, there's some great teams there. You know, Montpellier, London Irish, they're playing well. You know, but there's the fear factor for Ulster definitely shouldn't be there. You know, a bit of, it's like the psychology of it, a bit of momentum. I just think that there's a great young group at Ulster at the moment, and there's no reason why this couldn't be this can be a great avenue for us to lift the trophy for the season. Great opportunity anyway.
You touched on it there, Fergie, saying like a stepping stone. Like when Leinster won it in, I think it was 2013 maybe, or and then
Cameron Cup.
We won the Europe, Champions Cup the following year.
We won the league the following year.
Did we not win the Champions Cup the following year?
No, we won.
It's hard to remember, isn't it? It's just so many.
But no, you're right.
I'm going home.
No, but
so listen, why do you think we didn't win a trophy with it? Can we go back on that question again? But
I'm out of here.
Which one was it?
But
it
was the league.
My point was,
the league next year. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I know what I actually think it did for that team was there was a couple of European successes, and it probably humbled the group a little bit because we weren't where we needed to be. And we're talking about nights. Remember great European nights. I remember some pretty bleak ones as well. Like I remember heading over to Claremont, and we got beaten pretty well over there. And then we came back, and they also beat us in Dublin, and we didn't get out of the group stages, and that's why we ended up in the Amlin Cup. But we're talking about great days, but you invest so much it's the most you invest from a club level, as players and a group. Your goal at the start of the year, I'm sure it has been for all the years you were playing, was really is to win it. If you have any sort of backbone in your team or good squad, you have to be ambitious enough to win it. And I suppose these are the weeks, and we're talking about big days and all the rest, but those days are so important. The prep each day, making sure the detail is right early on in the week. Like I'm not sure what difference have you found for European weeks from say being, in a Bristol, being in Bordeaux, being in Leinster to being up in Ulster. What's the difference?
Yeah, definitely being with Leinster or Ulster, it's a real switch. The Irish sides hold Europe on a real pedestal. In France and in England, they're probably on parity. So you don't quite feel the exact same buzz, but speaking of my experience with Ulster and Leinster, everything from when the team's getting announced to that European music coming on, it's like the squad doubles for European games. I don't know what it is. Obviously, all your internationals are back in. All these players who've been injured seem to come out of the woodwork, and it's
all the lads that couldn't play against the Dragons. Like, I'm available. I'm good now. I'm fit. Yeah, cheers.
So it makes for a very competitive training week. That was one thing I always remembered. It was just how ferocious the training was, because everyone knew that it's nearly test match standard going into a top level European game. And even walk the two teams walking out together. They're small things, but you notice as a player, geez, it's different this week. We're on here. It's Europe.
Massively so. But I remember the Northampton game in 2011. Just going back on, I suppose, a few memories, and that one was just a really special one. I remember the two of us were on the bench, but over the years, I know people talk about the halftime chat that Johnny had made, but really, I remember so much going on, and I remember him talking. What was your recollection of it?
Yeah, I remember, obviously we've played in games where things aren't going well and you just don't regain control. But sometimes you can get a feeling, even though you might go 15 or 20 points down, you get a feeling kind of going, we're not out of this yet. And there definitely wasn't that feeling at half time of any loss of control. Obviously Johnny spoke and spoke really well. But I remember Joe stepping in and just being so clear on his delivery of messages on what wasn't done in the first half, but how close it is to working, to go out and execute it in the second half. And, obviously as an out half, I'm just thinking strategy and what plays you thinking off line out, what plays you thinking off scrum. And it was an amazing performance in the second half, but it was looking back on it, seeing what he said actually coming to life and players executing in the second half and getting those tries to get us back into the game. And like ultimately what happened there for me was we just broke Northampton, and there was a kind of feeling, even with like 15 minutes to go, there was a feeling this game is done, it's over.
It's funny though how certain moments can turn a final. Like it could be a scrum penalty. Remember, our scrum was going backwards. The proper had the reverse lights on in the first half, and then I think one of the first scrums in the second half, in the first couple of minutes, scrum penalty, and then you're going like then the belief just starts setting, and you can feel that like just filtering through to everyone in the team. And on the flip side, then I remember I was watching the game. I didn't get picked, but the final in 2019 against Saracens, and just a few moments that you could see the belief was almost, it was just draining out of the lads. The couple of things that Saracens just kept getting right. We were pounding their line on several times, just crucial turnovers. Liam Williams getting the ball back one time, stuff like that. Such energy kind of boosters for one team and such a drainer for the other. It's interesting how they play out, because the margins really in the finals, for majority of finals, they're not much, so it's just about getting those smaller moments.
It's funny
right.
you say that. Like I remember in that Northampton game, had like a kind of surging attack and someone threw like a dreadful pass, and like Leo, like obviously he's a fantastic player, but like wouldn't have had the most amazing hands and probably not the most flexible guy either. But I'll never forget.
He wasn't throwing your skip passes anyway.
I'll never forget this.
He would have put his back out of it.
This catch he made leading up to, I think, one of Johnny's tries.
It was like he had super glue in his hand.
Yeah, it was up, but it's funny, like I don't remember a whole lot, but that was one thing that stepped out in my mind. I remember just thinking, geez, that was a huge moment. You knock that on, they exit, the game can get away from you.
Yeah, I know, and suppose that like lead me on to another point of hostile environments to go to, because you're talking there about Ravenhill and the difference that would have made. Like, we know from being a Leinster player for a long time, we know how tough it is to go there. Like, it's such a tough place to go when you have a full crowd there. It's so difficult. It's so difficult to come away with a win. I think you play a different team when you play Ulster up there. But what were the tougher grounds that you went to that were maybe outside of the country, not Irish?
I think you mentioned the team a few minutes ago about Clermont away. The noise of that stadium in Clermont is incredible, and obviously you're playing against, like in European Cup, as you mentioned, the internationals are all there, so you've got your two best teams coming at each other. And whenever we played Clermont, we came out the blow. It's such a fast. It was such a great pitch as well, so the game just started at such a frantic pace, and the offloads, and you just go on, and then it feels like the crowd's on top of you, and every mistake, it's just
They have
that
those little
noise.
batons as well.
So
don't
the batons, they don't stop
croak or
banging
something.
those until the fans know that the Clermont have won. They don't stop banging these. So I remember going in the game for the line-out. So for the line-out, you have to prep that if you can't hear the call, you need to. We had calls where we had to like speed it up, because you knew, right, if we make a call when you're in the line-out, you won't be, if you're behind, you can't hear. So you can't hear your trigger call. So we literally had like so many calls where it was like, right, if you're obviously hand signals, things like that, just to quicken up and give us options, because there's times where you cannot hear what is going on, what the call is. So it's just the intimidation.
Because the capacity there isn't even that. I think it's something like 18,000.
But you're coming from,
literally sounds.
change rooms are so deep.
100,000.
Yeah, but change rooms are so
It's
deep.
the
and you
perfect
come
rugby
up
stadium though. Like, it's like four walls, and then there's a mix of terracing as well on ground level.
Yeah.
So like you feel like the crowd are right on top of you.
Yeah.
And then obviously having people standing around creates a very special kind of rugby atmosphere that you wouldn't get in a soccer stadium as such.
I think their crowd as well, it's kind of, the city is made up for a really good following for rugby side. Industrial city.
Big time.
That's the main team. They don't really have a soccer team there. They're a very good team. But yeah, some of the experiences, never won over there, but the experiences, I'd agree with you, probably the toughest place I've played in Europe. But another one that would stick out for me would have been Toulon. We went over to play them. We were both involved in this game, Mads, I think. where we had Matt O'Connor was the coach, and we had them in the group stages, and I think it was 2015. Sorry, it wasn't actually. It was the quarter final. Do you remember we got to a quarter final and got knocked out?
Yeah.
We got knocked out of a quarter final, and it was over there.
Yeah.
And
Was Leo coach then? Was he? No. Maybe not.
No, I don't think he was.
This is earlier on, yeah.
Yeah, but they throw their newspapers up in the air when they think their team is, won, and unfortunately, they all have a newspaper underneath their seat, and they fire it in the air, and I think it was like 15 minutes in, the newspapers were up. I was like, oh jeez, this is going to be a long day at the office. That was the team when they had Gitto, they had Wilkinson, they were winning the 3-0, the 2 Andrews brothers.
Pack as well. Their pack was so strong. Remember, it was like running into a brick wall. It's a small pitch as well. Yeah, it just felt like there was no space that day.
Very tough. Another point that I'd like to kind of talk to you about is, I suppose, the culture of coaches. I suppose in years gone by, pitching a group in a way where you're driving the emotional energy up in the group and in the room, maybe right before the game or days before. And I think from coaches that I've had recently and in the past few years, and successful ones, that's probably gone out of the game. What experiences do you have where, I suppose there's an example of Declan Kidney. I suppose he had all the Munster boys crying the night before the 2000 Heineken Cup final against Northampton, and unfortunately for them, they lost the game. So I think there's probably, it's debatable as to know what exactly is the best thing to do.
Well, I mean, from my perspective, that's probably one of the things that changed the most from whenever I was a 21, 22-year-old and a 30-year-old in that Ulster team or with Ireland. You could win games without a doubt back in the day before teams were professional, but were they really that next standard? And I think teams feeding off the passion and bouncing off the walls and crying, and I remember my first few caps for Ulster, I was so nervous that I'd have to go to the toilet and be sick before my first Irish cap. I can't remember, but I'm sure I probably was retching because of nerves. So you have your pre-match meals and all that sitting there, and you have adrenaline. As you get older, and I think the professional teams nowadays, like the psychology around it all, you cannot waste energy in that way. Like me being sick before test match, and well, that's energy. I needed that to be able to keep going. And it sounds still stupid, but 1% there's small margins. And I do think that when I first started, team talks were loud, aggressive. People were bouncing off the walls. That didn't happen in my last 5 years playing pro rugby, because it's just you knew that if you were able to perform, yes, there's always going to be emotional. You're always going to bring emotional edge of rugby. It has to mean something more to you, but you can't waste your energy the way.
Yeah, I think it's about channeling it in a certain way. And
don't get me wrong, I love, it's still, rugby will always have an emotional side to it, and to see tears, I know you love a good cry during a rugby pitch, but yeah, you can't, the game has changed, you have to
Maz
make...
and CJ.
CJ.
Crying together. He actually probably outcried you there the other week. But listen, a lot of focus on the Six Nations these past few weeks, and Dev Toner setting that record yesterday, and what a fitting, to be the most capped Leinster player of all time, and so durable. We've all played with him and are great friends with the guy. What a top man and an amazing player. And I suppose in ways you could say Dev was, and I know he has 70 caps for Ireland and he has all these trophies, but in ways you could probably call him underrated. Would you agree?
Yeah, he's not a player who grabs the headlines, or if he's not in the team on a given week that they're going, oh geez, we're in trouble, Dev's not in. But we had the joy of playing with him, all three of us, and he was just a guy who consistently produced every single. It was always 7s, 8s every single weekend. If you look through his, 300, the guts of 350 professional games he's played, how many times has he had a 5, or even 4 or 5? Never. He's just rock solid.
How many people has he injured in those 300?
Incredible.
Including his own teammates.
Similar to that number. Even when he'd run into you in training, it was always a very unenjoyable experience. You always seem to cop a knee or an elbow.
I'm convinced his bones are made of something different than what they're...
I remember one of the camps, I mean, you never to reach those numbers that you just said. You have to be so durable. And one of the days I
In that
remember,
position as well.
In that position, unbelievable. And he was on a physio bed one day, and I remember everyone just going, "Geez, Deb's on a physio bed. What's going on?" And it was I'm pretty sure it was an ankle. And it was fine, strapped up, and he played. You know, I don't
Never
remember
got
him.
massage. Never got massage treatment, which is like for a forward, like getting like bangs rubbed out and stuff.
Optional yoga. No,
No yoga. No yoga.
No.
I mean, from my perspective, like
Very stretched his hamstring before he ran. Not that I don't think he has any, but going on to but just talking about kind of underrated players, and I suppose ones you've played with. Another one I thought an outstanding game yesterday. He's been playing great rugby for a number of seasons now, particularly this year, was Reese, and I think he's a guy that, like, anyone that has played with him or played against him would not underrate him in any way. But what I'm trying to say is, you look how many caps he has. Like, that guy should have more caps, and I just don't understand why he doesn't. But for me, he was just one of those guys that, like, you play with him, and you know he's one of the first people you want on your team sheet beside you, just in the trenches on a tough day. Like, what examples could you give from guys over the years that you would say were maybe a little bit underrated?
I mean, Reece, the obvious one that jumps on me, just because I played with him for such a long time, from even like Irish schools the whole way up and against for Leinster's Kevin McLaughlin. I think that Kev could have got he had an unbelievable Leinster career, obviously, but I don't know how many Irish caps he had, but at a different time I think he could have got a lot more. Obviously had to finish with career-ending injury. From an Ulster perspective, I think someone that is quite underrated, even though he's had a great Ulster career, is Luke Marshall. So Luke's been suffered such a bad luck with injuries. Obviously, there's so many centres in Ireland and in Ulster, young pups coming through. But every time Luke comes back from an injury, he kind of reminds you. Then you go, "Oh gosh, I remember why he's so good." He's such like a defensive leader for that Ulster team, and I don't know how many caps he's had for Ireland. I don't think it's even in double figures, but I think
Still a young man.
He is still a young man, yeah. And I mean, you obviously, I don't know when he's due to come back.
Yeah, even touching on that, like you can see, I think it's you almost have to play within with these guys in their team to fully appreciate them, and I think as players, it's about seeing the unseen work, you know. And like in fairness to Fergie, like you were, you know, one of the best I've played with on that front. But Lukey's very similar.
Fergus very underrated. Come on now. You should have way more caps.
I probably was, actually. I think we need to take a full section to talk about that. No, I'll give you that 50 quid after, man. Thanks a million.
No, but it's you know, it's going from ruck to ruck. It's making a selfless run to run a dummy line. It's, you know, chasing back when someone breaks through. And you only really pick up on these things when you're doing a full game review with your own team. And if you see the same guys popping up over and over, you just develop this unbelievable respect for them, and Lukey Marshall is definitely one of them. Dev is another one of them. Reese, you know, something like Owen Redden. You know, for me, when I was coming through, I would have been really nervous before games, and like one thing that definitely would have calmed my nerves would have been knowing what the guys around me were going to bring. And you know, playing with Redzer would have been someone I know he's going to, you know, be guaranteed to have a 7 or an 8. You know, the core parts of his game are going to be on. He's going to know all his detail, and that would have settled me down a lot and given me confidence in my own game.
Speaking of selfless actions, do you have a bit of a story about Reese off the pitch where he solid for you?
I have a good wee story about Reese Ruddock. So in 2014, we were rooming together during the autumn series, and we were due to play South Africa. And I was due to start, and I suffered a mini stroke that morning. So obviously, pretty life-changing event for me. But Reese was my roommate, so we're in the Shelbourne. The morning of the test match, I was due to start, feeling great. Went into the toilet. First thing we woke up, and the mini stroke came on. So I lost my voice. Side of my face dropped, and my arm, all the strength of my arm dropped. So pretty scary. But I mumbled to Reese. So Reese jumps out of bed, comes in the bathroom, and you know, I couldn't speak to him, but he could see that something serious, obviously something pretty serious, was going on. So Reese then just ran straight out of the door to get help. So he ran through the Shelbourne, past all guests, staff, through the hotel lobby to find the Irish doctor, I think he ran back, him and the doctor were back in our room within like 6-7 minutes, and at that stage I had recovered and was all fine. But what the hero that Reese was, so whenever Reese slept in his boxer shorts, and that was it.
Yeah.
So instead of Reese, going, oh gosh, right, I better grab a t-shirt or shorts or tracksuit bottoms, he went, no, I just got to get help. So he ran out the door just in his boxers. All this
Running around the main bar in the shower room there.
around the bar shouting for help. And obviously Reese is in good shape. So I think every female guest and female staff, had a real treat that day by seeing Reese, just in his boxer shorts. But no, I like that. And then Reese ended up starting.
He played in the game, yeah.
Started my position, scored a try. Pretty sure got man of the match. He was brilliant. But
Turns out he actually drugged you.
yeah, he did the night before.
Yeah.
But no,
He just ran his boxers to make it realistic that it wasn't him. But on that note, lads, that's a great story to finish with. But cheers for that. That was great.
House of Rugby Ireland, here on Joe. Game changed.
It is my pleasure to welcome my Irish teammates. I've got Beibhinn Parsons, Connacht, Irish winger, and I've got Dorothy Wall, Munster, an Irish back row. Girls, we've been trying to have you on for a long time, and we finally got you on ahead of the Women's Six Nations. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Eimear.
I'm so excited to talk
here.
to you. So excited to talk to you, and I'm sure our listeners will really enjoy this conversation. I suppose you two have been so lucky that you have started playing rugby from a really young age, completely different rugby journey to me. But we're going to just talk about your rugby journey and how you got to where you are now, two absolute rising stars in Irish women's rugby and the future of Irish women's rugby. Dorothy, you have 3 brothers. It has to have started somewhere there, your rugby experience.
Yeah, I suppose my 3 brothers always played down in Feathered, and my dad would have coached, and we'd be a very kind of rugby orientated family. And my mum, we would always kind of rode horses and stuff. But during transition year, Polly Murphy down at the club was like, "Look, will you give the rugby a go?" Because I actually haven't said this before, but when I was like 5 or 6, I went down to one of the rugby sessions, but I actually got really nervous and scared and saw all the boys on the try line. And I actually was like, Dad, no, Dad couldn't force me to go down. So I left when I was 5 or 6, which I'm not very proud of, but I came back when I was 16 then and got into it, played for the school in Feathered, and that's where it all started for me, I guess.
Did it help having 3 brothers at home, that you're able to play with and I suppose rugby tackle and use them as the punch bag?
Are you joking? They would not come out and pass with me if their lives depended on it. I'd be lucky to get them out. And they're all kind of into kicking and stuff, and like the toe poke is my speciality because they're all backs, I think, so they'd be out like place kicking and grubbers and whatnot, and it doesn't really suit me that well. So we'd be different, but sometimes Andrew, the youngest, will come out passing with me, but he generally goes inside fairly quickly.
all the skillful kind of things you're talking about there. Are you trying to say that you're not very skillful, Darrell?
Oh no, sure. I'd never say that, but I will. If you see me kicking a ball in a game, we're in massive trouble.
Note to self. Hopefully, we won't see that anytime soon. So you started
God,
off at the
not at
age
all.
of 16 you went and you played rugby at 16. So not late, I suppose, relatively young as well.
Yeah.
And tell us about your journey then. You started with Feathered Rugby Club and continued on to Munster. And tell us how you got to the Irish women's senior team.
Yeah, so I started in Feathered, played under 16 and under 18 with Feathered. We travelled to Cork, Limerick, was down in Rose Green and Feathered 2 nights a week. My mum she's done serious mileage behind the wheel, like getting me to different training sessions. And then from club, there was Munster underage, and we'd be down in Cork or Limerick twice a week, and I loved that. And we had a great kind of setup that year, and myself, Enya and Emily were actually the back line, would you believe, for the Interpros, and we won our last year with Emily at 10, me on the wing, and Enya at centre. So that was a good year. And then from there, just kind of went into underage sevens, went to the Loughborough School Games and like the Youth Olympic qualifiers in Vichy. So from underage sevens, I was brought into the senior sevens program just after my leaving cert. So I've been in the sevens program for 3 years and got captain Ukraine in 2019. And then I was brought into 15s in late 2019 as well. So that's how I'm here today. It's been a lot of rugby, but I've enjoyed it all.
A lot of rugby. And I think the one thing about both yourself and Beibhinn is that you're so lucky. You've so much rugby played, and your 21st birthday is coming up on May the 4th, so you still have so many
There you
years
go.
ahead of you.
Put
so
it in the
many years.
diary.
Absolutely. We'll have to celebrate that one. Bay, you weren't as scared of the boys, unlike Dorothy over here. You started off your rugby career playing with the boys.
Yeah, I suppose I did. I was under the impression that it was a mixed team. I found out fairly quickly it wasn't very mixed. I was the only girl, so they use that term very generously. But yeah, I think it was like under 10s or under 11s, and I loved it. I played a full season. We got to community games final. It was class, and then turned up the following season looking to play again, and was told, you can't play with the boys anymore. So that was me then at about 11, 12, hanging up the rugby boots and going back to Gaelic football, thinking that was the end of my rugby career. Little did I know.
And Dave, why do you think they told you can't play anymore? Was it genuinely because you were running rings around the boys?
No, I wish that was the case, but I think you just get to a stage where like the boys start to outgrow you, and it just becomes a bit of a rule that you're not allowed to play anymore. But then a couple of years later, we set up a girls' team, and it was colossal. Like we had about 40 odd girls at training, and it just took off in a huge way. And since then, I probably skipped a couple of steps, played with Connacht under 18s, and then luckily got onto the Irish Sevens. Met Grigsy there as a head coach, and he sort of fast tracked me onto the senior setup at 16. So it was not your typical textbook rugby pathway, but sure, we got there in the end.
Yeah, and for anyone who doesn't realise, Beibhinn was 16 years old playing her first game against the United States in Donnybrook. It's a phenomenal achievement. But what's even more bizarre is that you weren't actually allowed to play interpros at senior level, but you played your first international senior game. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it was weird. I was told I can't play senior club or I can't play senior province. I still haven't, played my first club match at senior level, so still waiting to tick that box. It was weird, and I was definitely out of my depth. So that, like in that USA game, I'd never fully, grasped. I didn't have a smart rugby brain at that stage. So definitely not working up through the pathways showed a little bit, but I think the last few years of training under my belt, I've sort of grown into the position a bit more.
I wouldn't say that, Beibhinn. I think, if you're old enough, you're good enough. And I think you have proved that, at the end of the day, it's not that long ago that you got your first cap. And I remember that very clearly. Your very first cap, your mum dropped you off into the lobby of the hotel, and she chatted to me and a few of the girls, the older girls who were there, and she just asked us to mind you. Like you were going playing an international rugby game against the USA, and your mum was so worried for you.
Oh, I don't think she could, even still, I don't think she can make it through a full match without like putting her hands over her eyes. Like the poor woman just can't stand rugby, but she makes it to all the matches anyway.
Yeah. How special was that first cap? I suppose for anyone, I think for me, coming from a Gaelic football background, the first cap ceremony is probably one of the most special special occasions in my rugby career. And even that jersey presentation the night before, we had Lynn Cantwell speaking to us, phenomenal rugby player who has done it all really with Irish women's rugby. And I remember she had a great speech, a really, really inspiring speech that day, and she presented us our jerseys. But how nervous were you ahead of that game?
Yeah, I remember Lynn's speech as well. I remember how much she talked about, the passion and her love for the Irish jersey and the green colour. I suppose at the time, I think I was so young and so naive that I didn't realise how big of a deal it was. And now, only in reflection and with COVID and having time to look back on things, I realised how sort of colossal that was, and that was the start of my journey. So I think if I was to get my first cap tomorrow, it would nearly be more nerve-wracking because it means so much more to me. But at the time, I think I was so overwhelmed with everything going on that I was just like zooming through the whole experience, not even able to take it in.
And is that why you were so overwhelmed that you managed to lose your jersey on your first cap night?
Eimear, I didn't think you'd do me like that.
Tell us a little bit about that story.
So I may or may not have allegedly lost my first cap jersey, and I was in bed the night before a match trying to get as much season as possible, and I wake up in a cold sweat. I literally cannot for the life of me remember where my jersey is. And note to self, don't ever ring the manager as your first port of call. Ring your players.
Rookie mistake.
Absolute rookie mistake. So I'm frantic, pacing up and down the hotel room. Bear in mind, I couldn't have a roommate because I was 16 and it was against child safety regulations or whatever.
16? Were
So
you
I don't
16 getting your first cap?
And so I ring Elaine Ryan at the time. She was our manager, and she's freaking out. I'm freaking out. Don't have a clue where my jersey is. She's trying to source another one. Like, as far as I know, it just evaporated into thin air until the next morning. Laura Feely taps me on the shoulder, hands me my jersey. Did you forget something, baby? And God, yeah. To tell you I didn't get much sleep that night is an understatement.
So not only did you get your first cap at 16, you also had a sleepless night worrying about where your jersey was, but that's definitely a memorable moment. Dorothy, you got your first cap a whole year later in the next Six Nations. Your whole family were there. I remember seeing your gran. She was there, one of your main supporters, and we met her during Family Day last year at the Aon Family Day. You know, I played with you at Munster. I knew what you were capable of. I knew that you were absolutely ready to play rugby for Ireland. But you also have a very similar funny story about that day where you ended up texting your cousin Matt instead of Dr. Matt that day. Now, this is one of the funniest stories, and I think it's worth the airwaves.
Do I have to tell this story?
Absolutely.
Oh my God. So I actually can't believe you've done this to me. I had kind of a funny stomach on the day of the match, and I texted Matt, who I thought was the team doctor at the time, and I said, "Oh Matt, my stomach feels really funny. Is there anything I can take? Because you know it's match day, and I don't want to be feeling sick for the game." And so I texted Matt, and he was like, "Oh, I can recommend like these alkaline things, or have you tried like some ice water or going for fresh air?" And I was like, "Yeah, this is really helpful, but can you actually give me the medication or whatever? Because, you know, I need it." And he kept like recommending stuff, and I was like, "Oh, can I get that off you?" And then Matt was like, "I'm actually in the States right now. Are you in America as well?" And I was like, "Wait, like I've made a big mistake here." Turns out it was my 25-year-old American cousin who I WhatsApped about my stomach issues on the day of my first cap, who gave me lots of lovely advice, but was not who I wanted to know about that.
He was really kind. He was really kind.
He's a great guy. Like, oh my God, to say I was mortified, and now I'm even more mortified because, oh my God. Anyway,
did you ever text Dr. Matt and actually get to the right Matt that time?
Oh, I did. Yeah, I got sorted, but he told me to come up to his room straight away. But sure, that would have been what would have made sense in the first place. But I wasn't really thinking straight. But we got over that hump, and
I think you were both proof that first caps are stressful, and that's absolutely proof to the pudding that, you know, it's not always plain sailing. But going back to the actual game, Dorothy, of your first cap, you were phenomenal when you came on. You hit everything that moved. How special was it for you and your family? And obviously your gran was there, but your dad was there, your mum was there, there was cousins. How special was it for them, for you, and for you to get your first cap?
Oh yeah, like probably one of the best days I've had. Like, it was great. Like, it was great to just get on the pitch, because when you're on the bench, it's like you're playing the match, but physically you're not, but mentally you're there. So I nearly exhausted myself in the first half. I was so into it. Like, I was actually a little bit drained. But then once I got on, kind of got into the flow of the game, really enjoyed it, and was like, right, okay. I kind of settled once I made the first hit, and that kind of worked for me there. And it was great, like, to have me there. And a load of my friends actually came up from UCD who wouldn't have really rugby brains. Like when I was warming up on the sideline, they were screaming, like, and I hadn't even gone on. Like I was just warming up, and they were screaming my name. And in fact, it was a little embarrassing, but I loved the support. But no, it was great. It was great to have everyone there.
Yeah, that's something that we'll definitely miss, this year with the Six Nations. Obviously, you guys both played in November. What was it like without having crowds there, Bay?
Yeah, it was weird. I don't think you realize this, the extra 1% that like having the crowd there gives you. Even in your warm up and the buzz, and just knowing that the whole stadium, especially when it's on in Donnybrook, are behind you. It makes you push that extra bit harder. It makes you run when your legs are dead. That extra 1%. Like you can still muster up the courage to win a match no matter what when you're wearing a green jersey, but having the support of a full crowd and a full stadium, cheering for you and cheering for your country, it does give you that extra oomph.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I suppose all joking aside, it is a pleasure to play with the two of you. And, how have you both found the jump from underage rugby to senior rugby? We'll go to you, Dara, first. And what advice would you give younger girls that want to make that jump from under 18s that have probably missed out on a year's worth of rugby in the last while with COVID? They've missed out on that year of playing and training together. But what advice would you give them?
I think asking questions is huge, and being proactive in how you learn, and like getting all the advice from these really experienced players on the pitch. And then in terms of the team, like you have to be able to give them back the slagging they give you, because like there's only one way to earn that respect, and that's to be able to give it back and take it. And I've learned that the hard way, because I wouldn't say bullying is the term, but I've certainly got my fair share of slagging in the last while, but I've come to terms with it. So you have to give as good as you get, and just be proactive about improving and getting knowledge off older players, I think.
Yeah, and who would be the worst on the team for the slagging, Dara?
Oh, it has to be the captain, Kira Griffin. Yeah,
And me.
like I don't know how I don't know how she's gotten away with it thus far, but look, I'm not complaining. But
Wait till she sees those pink boots at the weekend.
Oh God, I'm ready. I'm ready.
Ready for it.
You
What
never
about
know
you?
all about the pink boot slagging.
I actually saw the back three the
It's
last day,
different.
and they all were wearing pink boots, and I was like, what's the crack with everyone gone back to pink boots again? I thought that was so 2 years ago, but no, they're back on the pink boots then.
That was so 2 years ago.
Oh, Eimear! We never
I'm
left the
obviously-
pink boots.
I'm clearly not trending at the moment without my pink boots. Beibhinn, what about you? What advice would you give girls that want to make that jump from underage up to senior level?
Yeah, I think a major thing is giving yourself that grace period to get used to senior rugby. Don't be too hard on yourself on those first few trainings back. Everyone's going to be rusty. Things are going to be new. Systems are going to be new. It's going to be that little percentage faster. Give yourself that grace period to get used to the game, settle in, get to know your teammates. And, from there on, you're just as good. If you've worked up the underage pathway, you've probably a lot of rugby under your belt anyway. So you're probably thereabouts with your teammates. Age is just a number. I think you're more than well capable of making that jump. So jump in the deep end, but also give yourself that grace period to get used to it.
Yeah, what was your first impression of everyone when you came onto the squad as a 16-year-old? Like, it's mental that you were a 16-year-old, then you had to go play the Welsh game and then go straight into your mocks. Like, what is the mindset of a 16-year-old jumping into a squad like us?
Yeah, it was a weird dynamic going from obviously secondary school where I'm being taught by, people your age, like half of you are teachers anyway, and then going in and, you're my teammates. So it was a weird dynamic, and it was a weird shift at the start. I remember one time Rugby Players Ireland came in and they were giving a talk about all the services that they offer. And I was there trying to scribble down my maths homework, and they were talking about, pension advice. And I was just like, what in the world am I doing here? Like, what is going on? Pension advice. I haven't even done like fifth year exams. But no, like obviously I grew into it and now I love it. I take the slagging as much as I give it. But that first year was definitely a weird dynamic and I was still finding my feet. And at 16 you're not always sure of yourself, and then going into a well-established squad it can be a bit difficult. But yeah, no, I'm glad I've had the years under my belt now. I can take the slagging.
Yeah, you've slotted in seamlessly. Darrow, when you joined the squad, like what players really helped you along the way, or what coaches or what people in general helped you along the way for advice, or who would you go to for advice if you weren't really sure?
I suppose as well as being a bully, like Junior has definitely helped me a lot. Like she kind of, I get a lot of slagging, but there's a lot of useful things she tells me too. And I think, to be honest, anyone in the forward pack, Hannah O'Connor is a wealth of knowledge and so skillful. Laura Feely's the same. Like there's loads of girls there who've just loads of experience that is just there for us to take, really. So like Junior has been particularly helpful, but there's lots of just forwards wise, obviously the backs are so knowledgeable as well. But for me, those would be the standouts, I think.
Yeah, thanks for that there. I suppose looking ahead to this year's Six Nations, we face Wales next Saturday in Cardiff Arms Park at 5 p.m. It's on RTE as well, so it's very exciting. Dorothy, it's been so long. How excited are you to get started?
Oh, I'm buzzing. Can't wait. I am. It's kind of the only thing on my mind. Like I'm just really excited to play, and I think that's all I think that's kind of how we all feel. Like we just want to be able to play a match and get going, get the whole campaign going, and get in the swing of things. Really.
Yeah. What about you?
I feel like we're a jack in the box. When you wind it up, and we've had about 20 camps under our belt, and we're just going to explode.
Yeah, it's going to be great, and whatever team takes the park next Saturday week on the 10th, I think everyone is ready at this stage, and I think there's such competition in the squad that I don't think we've ever been more ready. We're going to finish off with a quick fire round. So I'm going to ask you every second question, and I'm going to start with you, Dorothy. So we'll start with Dorothy, then move on to Beibhinn, and I mean quick fire round. So it's the first thing that comes to your mind. All right. Dorothy, one thing you would bring to a desert island.
My phone.
Beibhinn, one person you would take into battle with you.
Lindsay P.
I knew you were going to say that. She'll be delighted.
Probably me.
Dorothy, how many times did it take you to pass your driving test?
I've yet to convert that. I haven't passed it.
I thought you had passed it.
No, it was the most disappointing thing ever. I got about 8 grade 3s. The driving instructor was swearing at me by the end of it. It was terrible.
Oh my God, I was convinced you passed it.
No, thanks for that.
Beibhinn, who has the best style on the team?
Best style. I'll say Emily.
Dorothy, who's the biggest joker on the team?
Hannah O'Connor.
Beibhinn, what is your cheat meal?
Scrum diddlies.
Absolutely. And Dorothy, most importantly, when is your lip gloss tutorial coming out?
This is a joke. This has just been an absolute slating of me. Soon. It's on my YouTube channel soon.
Oh my God. Yeah. For anyone who doesn't know the background on that, we had a Zoom call pretty recently. And what, did you think your camera was off?
They went into the COVID regulations and it was like a PowerPoint in front of me. So I couldn't see faces. So I forgot that people could see me. But yeah, she started put on lip gloss because it was just there in front of me.
She got absolutely caught rotten. There's plenty of videos doing the rounds, I think, of Dorothy's lip gloss application.
The worst thing was, though, the next training, Griggsy said it to me in the warm-up. He was like, "Oh, nice lip gloss, Dara." I was like, "Oh, thank you."
No, there's nothing
I
worse.
was so low at that point. Oh, God.
You probably got it in the players group and then you didn't think management knew about it, so there's nothing worse.
Oh, no, I thought, okay, maybe I've gotten away with it. Then Griggsy says this to me, head coach. I was like, oh, class.
Girls, thank you so much for coming on today. It has been one of the most enjoyable chats I've had. I hope that everyone really enjoys listening to both Dorothy Wall and Beibhinn Parsons, who hopefully will be ripping it up in this year's Women's Six Nations. And our first game starts Saturday week, the 10th, against Wales in Cardiff Arms Park at 5 p.m. So make sure that you tune in on RTE.
House of Rugby Ireland, here on Joe. Game changed.